Hello, and thank you very much for coming to my presentation here at this event. It's really great of you guys to have me and to, have and to really be here at my presentation. So here I am. I'm Walter Dillard. I'm a professional Forex trader, and I mainly focus on quant-based methods, algorithmic-based Forex trading here. I also own a company that uses algorithmic Forex trading to manage accounts. I mainly do this for large hedge funds and asset allocators, but I also do this as well for retail traders and private investors as well. But yeah, thank you very much for coming to my presentation, and I'd love to just be able to tell you a bit about my journey to become as successful as I am these days, and really some of the lessons learned along the way that would allow anybody to do what ultimately I've been able to do here. So anyway, thank you very much. Sit back and enjoy. So originally, I started trading back in high school. I was 15 years old, and we had those fun, demo style mock investment kind of stock trading competitions. And so I was somebody who really loved doing those. I really loved stock trading. I really loved learning about it, and I did incredibly well as a stock trader, on these demo accounts in school. I won a number of school-wide competitions, as well as doing very well for my state. So ultimately, I really love trading, and I saw such a great future as somebody who, would be very, very profitable as a trader. Unfortunately, when it came to stock trading back then, we didn't have these current, zero cost brokers that we have nowadays, these zero commission brokers, etc. So back then you had to pay $6, $8 plus per order, regardless of the size that you were trading. So back then, I could have only invested a few hundred or maybe even $1,000. And so having positions that were only about $100 at most, having to pay essentially 16% for execution was just a no-go towards, profitability. So ultimately, I moved away from stock trading and decided to focus instead on the Forex market. So I jumped headfirst into Forex right when I turned 18, right when I was legally allowed to, and I began to learn about it and began to trade it. What's a little bit ironic is that I really didn't like Forex trading off the bat. And I say it's ironic because nowadays this is my full-time thing and I absolutely love it. I love Forex trading. But when I started out, I hated it. The main reason I hated it because it was really because I didn't know what I was doing, I was somebody who was trying to trade and trying to follow signals and trying to do this and trying to do that, and ultimately it was an entire mess. So that's when I decided I needed to learn more. So I went on to read a number of great books on trading. I focused on, just a few really good ones. For example, Trading in the Zone by Mark Douglas was an absolute epiphany for me and really introduced me to some of the most valuable lessons and contents in the world of trading altogether. So that was one of my favorites. I can also recommend Trading for a Living, also a fantastic book. And of course, great books that are not just specifically about trading, but about finance altogether. I can recommend great books like Think and Grow Rich, and of course, books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That entire series is pretty amazing for learning the legality on a number of things, as well as long-term investing and some aspects of valuable trading. Anyway, that's enough on the books, but I just got to say, hey, it's always important to read the important books and to really be able to learn a subject based on that. Anyway, so after learning a lot from Trading in the Zone primarily, I finally understood that the important part of trading was creating an edge. Ultimately, that's what allows you to succeed, just as a casino succeeds here because they have an edge. I always like to look to the game of roulette, for example. In roulette here, there are 38 different spaces or pockets here that people can bet on. And ultimately, the breakdown is, quite interesting and a little bit too technical for me to go through here. But essentially, the casino has a lot of different ways to ultimately have nearly a 3% advantage in all situations over the gambler. So in this kind of situation, The casino is able to consistently win over the gambler, and this is why ultimately they're successful. So regardless of how the gambler plays their bets here, in the long run, as long as enough people keep betting at the roulette wheel, and as long as they limit it to avoid those trying to martingale their way through it, then ultimately the casino comes out of roulette as a winner. Having seen this and seen how casinos do this, and the explanation in Trading in the Zone on that one is incredibly helpful, I then decided I wanted to approach trading as more of a professional and as somebody who really had and designed an effective edge. So I began to work manually to design my own edge in the signal trading room I was in at the time. Ultimately, that was not the right decision, I can say, because with the signal room, it wasn't a signal system that I could control or that I could properly measure. So I had to do a lot of backtesting on paper by hand. And ultimately, to backtest even a single year, it would take at least 50 plus hours of my time. And I did this for, a year or two worth of data in the signal room. But then the creator kept changing the signals, and things ultimately did not work out in that direction. At that point, several years into my Forex journey, having struggled as I was also going through college at the same time while trying to learn how to be a successful Forex trader, I then decided to turn towards the quant side of things. And ultimately, that's where I found my success, because I already had the solid trading foundation, and then all I really needed here was an ability to flawlessly execute, to not have emotions interfere, which I'd already done a pretty good job of tapping those down. But of course, I really needed a system that I could backtest much easier and that would be able to execute, even if I wasn't going to be able to be at the screen 24 hours a day. So ultimately, the quant side of things is what I came to be very successful in being able to design my own algorithms that do my trading for me. And to this day, that's the main focus I have in the Forex space. Having my systems able to execute these edges, and then being able to effectively back test them, forward test them, and of course, the comparative back test. So that's a little bit about my journey from being, a nobody in the industry, somebody with just an idea of what it was to be a trader, to ultimately being very successful and being able to manage millions and millions of dollars for a large number of hedge funds and asset allocators, as well as private investors all over the world. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the important lessons I've learned along the way and the keys to successful trading. Ultimately, to me, there are four main parts to consistent trading. The first step here is really all about having a good financial plan. The second step is about having a solid foundation in trading psychology. The third step is to have an edge in the markets and to effectively stress test that edge. And the fourth step is flawless execution. Regardless of if you decide to use a system that is fully automated or decide to use a system that is entirely manual, either way you go, this is the path that I find that most of my students and my mentees that I teach nowadays end up finding success. This is the right kind of path for that kind of success, at least that I've seen. The thing is, though, as I've talked with a lot of people in the community, grown my network, particularly on LinkedIn, I find that the case is that a lot of people tend to skip steps 1 through 3. They skip over these steps and they jump straight to step number 4. They decide, okay, I have this edge, I have this hypothesis of what's going to work in the markets, now I'm going to start pressing buttons. And they skip over these other 3 very, very important steps. And ultimately, these 3 steps make the 4th step a complete non-issue. But so many times, people end up just skipping these first 3 steps, and that's ultimately where they have problems. So let's start off first here at step number 1. So step number 1 is pretty simple. It's about having a solid financial plan. Yes, so a solid financial plan is incredibly important. Yet, almost nobody I talk with initially wants to create one of these solid financial plans. A lot of them have the attitude of, I want to make $1 million starting with $1,000, and I'm going to do it in 3 months. Instead of turning their $1,000 into $1 million, they typically turn that $1,000 into $0. And they do this consistently, time and time again, going for impossibly high levels of return, swinging and missing in a boom and bust cycle. So instead of that, I believe in the creation of a financial plan for your own success. And what I typically have my students do is create 3 different plans. The first plan being for success in 20 years, the second plan being for success in 5 to 10 years, the third plan being success in 1 to 2 years. The reason I have them create these 3 plans and not just one plan is to be able to diversify partially, and also to be able to build a stronger trading psychology. The thing is that a lot of people have those plans for 1 to 2 years, and as soon as the plan starts to not work, instead of repairing it, they begin to panic. They begin to panic because they haven't thought of a longer-term plan that ultimately would be something they can rely on, something that would back them up down to the psychological level. Because let's be honest, if somebody only has the 1 to 2 year plan and it all starts to fall apart and they all start to lose all of their money, they panic and they can't follow their own plan, even if it's a good plan. But having those other 2 plans really can help these people out. I've seen this firsthand time and time again, and it is just amazing what a difference it can make if you have all 3 plans. When it comes to the 20-year plan, a lot of people say, hey, well, that's a large portion of my life, and, what good is that money going to do me in 20 years? My life is very different in 20 years. Think of it more for your family, for your legacy, for your foundation, for the long-term focus if the 20 years seems like a long period of time. Ultimately, it's about building a very solid foundation of wealth and doing so consistently without being too tied up in the day-to-day stuff. This is also then where step 2 comes in. A 5 to 10 year plan also seems like a lot of time to a lot of people, but having this plan in place is incredibly important. And then, of course, finally, having a 1 to 2 year plan is always awesome and feels great because it's ultimately a high-risk, high-reward kind of plan. It's not always going to work, but if it does work, it's incredibly motivational and it's incredibly exciting. This is what I recommend for the basic financial plans. Step number 1. For step number 2, developing solid belief in trading psychology, this is a key part of the process. Many people, even with great systems, cannot succeed because of their trading psychology. They have a flawed trading psychology, so their trading is flawed. I see this all the time, and it's typically based on 4 fundamental fears, which are entirely covered in Trading in the Zone. But I like to dive a little bit deeper into them than the book initially does, as I do with step number 3 as well. So there are 4 basic fears of trading. These 4 fears happen to be the fear of missing out, which I would consider the strongest fear for a majority of people. The fear of leaving money on the table, also usually a very strong fear. The fear of losing or the fear of being wrong. Both of those end up also being very powerful fears. You can typically spot the fear that you suffer from the most based on the type of trading issues you run into. Somebody who ends up overtrading typically is suffering the first 2 fears that I named there. The fear of missing out primarily, and the fear of leaving money on the table can also motivate people to overtrade. If you find yourself undertrading or having a hard time executing your trades properly, then that's typically a fear that would be the last 2, the fear of losing money or the fear of being wrong. Now, how are these 2 fears different? Well, one is entirely monetarily focused, One is entirely focused on money alone. It's all about, oh no, my money, I don't want to lose money. So when you're playing around with a demo account or playing around with a small amount of money, a person with this kind of fear does not feel a lot of fear, does not have many issues. But when they start playing with larger amounts of money, that's when they typically suffer a problem. As well, you have the fear of being wrong, which a person will feel regardless of the account being a demo account or a real account. The fear of being wrong typically is based in perfectionism. But that's a little glimpse into basic trading psychology that's incredibly useful. Once you can notice these fears and begin to master them, then you're finally able to move out of this problem and towards a greater psychological foundation. Now, of course, there's more to trading psychology than just that, as I teach in my mentorship program, both one-on-one and also through a video series. So if you're interested in that, I'm sure you'll be able to contact me after this presentation, and I'm happy to tell you more about that. Now, on to steps 3 and 4. So, step number 3 is all about your edge. When it comes to trading, your edge is going to be the thing that makes or breaks you. Having the ability to be able to have a well-stress-tested edge is the real key to success. For example, why do you think casinos use the games they use? Why don't they put in a different game? Why don't they say, okay, we're going to put in a new game here where we're going to do rock, paper, scissors and do betting on that. Okay, it's a good idea. Let's just do it. They don't do that because that would be a terrible idea. They don't know the odds well enough. They don't have a well-tested and stress-tested model that proves that their idea, that this idea of having, rock, paper, scissors be a game at a casino, since they haven't actually tested that, they have no idea if it's going to work out or not. So they'd be foolish to put millions of dollars behind a game that they're not going to stress test. Versus, casinos end up putting billions of dollars behind games they've stress tested because consistently they have an edge over the gamblers. This is the same thing in the market. You want to have an edge over the market on average. This edge can be based on many different things. It can be a price action-based edge, it can be an indicator-based edge, it can be a fundamental edge. There are many successful approaches to developing an edge in the market. Many of them can work incredibly well. I'm not going to say one is better than the other or tell you the exact way to go about, the right way to make an edge, because they're really all right. There are so many good ways to create an edge. The thing is, though, that most people don't bother to create an edge. They just have a hypothesis about something that'll work, and then they just do it without even testing it. And, of course, there are also people who, instead of, doing that, they will create an actual edge. They'll test it a little, but they won't stress test it enough. They backtest maybe a month or two tops, and often it's not even that. I know many people who backtest a strategy for 2 weeks, and then they decide to deploy it in the live market with tens of thousands of dollars, which ultimately is a bad idea, as you could probably guess. Just crazy what some people do. Instead, what I recommend is stress testing an edge. So ultimately, you're better off going back a lot of years. I typically recommend at least 15 years of backtests being done on a strategy. Once you've statistically tested it and backtested it in this manner, I also recommend doing this with additional brokers' tick data. This is a lot easier to do in the Forex market specifically, and it's a lot easier to do when it comes to algorithmic trading over, of course, manual trading. But it can be done with manual trading as well, but sadly I do not have time to go through the full approach there. Regardless, being able to backtest an entire period of time like this, being able to backtest at least 15 years of data is incredibly important so that you can see your actual edge. See how well it performs under a variety of market conditions. Because if it can't perform under many market conditions when the market changes in the future, it's unlikely to consistently work. Once you have the backtest data, and particularly over several brokers, it's also important to live forward test it or demo forward test your strategy. Often I will demo a strategy for 6 months or more, so putting it on a demo account and letting it ride and seeing how well it does. I will then take that data, looking at the forward test data here, I will then take that and run a back test over that exact period of time that we've seen 6 months forward in the live market. Then I will compare the results and compare the variation between those two results. Ultimately, that's the kind of thing that shows me if a strategy is good or not. A bad strategy, even if it does well on a back test, will end up failing on the forward test. This is ultimately the way to verify if a strategy is going to end up being statistically good or statistically bad. And this is something I do still to this day as I design dozens more strategies to add to my arsenal here. So overall, if you do steps 1 through 3 successfully, then step number 4 is a complete non-issue, either having your robot execute for you or doing it manually. Once you've mastered your fears and you have a clear edge, then executing it is extremely easy. Anyway, thank you very much for having me on here. I'm ready to answer any and all of your questions. And yeah, thank you for sticking around for my presentation. I highly appreciate it. I look so forward for your questions here.